Hey freshmen, Mulaney here, going to walk you through this presentation on the goals and criteria. This will be on your test next week, and so, yeah, let's get started with the beginning of everything. Specifically, Madeleine Sophie Berra. So, as you know, she was one of the founding members of the First Superior General of the Religious of the Sacred Heart, and she was an incredible leader. By the time she died, they had set up schools in multiple continents and had several thousand religious members. Just explosive growth. So there's a picture of her back in the day. And then here's a picture of her as she is now. I think there's like a wax mask over her, but she is what's known as an incorruptible, fun fact. Not on the test, but yeah, you should, if you've never heard of this phenomenon, certain saints, when we dig them up, they're found to be miraculously not decayed, and so they're called incorruptibles. Madeleine Sophie and Rose Philippine, for a time, both incorruptible, although Philippine did start to decay after there was some flood damage. That's another story, though. But, yeah, so Madeleine Sophie started the RSCJ. Remember that RSCJ stands for Religieux du Sacré-Cœur de Jésus, or the Religious of the Sacred Heart. And yeah, it's also known as the Society or the Society of the Sacred Heart. All of these terms are interchangeable. So if you hear me or anyone else saying like RSCJ or the Society or the Society of the Sacred Heart, we're all referring to the same thing. Currently, the RSCJ hosts 150 schools, over 150 schools across 41 countries. In the United States, it's what's known as the Network of Sacred Heart Schools, and then across the world, it's called the International Network. And at least in the United States, all of the Sacred Heart schools are just incredibly beautiful. Yeah, here are just some of my favorites. Villa Duchesne in St. Louis, Convent of the Sacred Heart in Manhattan. This is where Lady Gaga went. And Convent of the Sacred Heart in San Francisco. So, if you want to check out more of those schools and like find out what they're about or what tuition costs at them or see more pictures, I encourage you to go to sacredheartusc.education. Follow the links around there. So, for a long time, the defining element of Sacred Heart schools, no matter where you went, like these different countries, different schools, different grade levels, it all felt very similar. In fact, at one point, you could literally do an exchange program and not miss a day of school. Like the same content was being taught in the same sequence. And so they were incredibly uniform. No matter where you went, though, what allowed this defining element was the nuns themselves. So no matter where you went, all these Sacred Heart schools were being run by Sacred Heart nuns and sisters. They were teaching nearly every course, and then doing meals and running the administration. It was from top to bottom a Sacred Heart run operation. That was the defining element, that the nuns themselves were present, and they all received similar formation and had a similar spirituality. So it gave this uniformity across all these diverse regions. No matter where you went, it was the same kind of atmosphere. But then, bum, 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 two things happened to change that defining element, or threaten that defining element. The first off is the 1960s. This was a time of great cultural change and turmoil, and at least in the Western world, starting in the 60s, we have this kind of cultural revolution, the counterculture, and a lot of the assumptions and ways of living were changed in the 60s. And within the church, there was this major event called Vatican II, or the Second Vatican Council, and it was this big church-wide meeting of all the bishops, and they changed a lot of the ways that religious orders could run themselves. So, these things combined. In Vatican II, they gave these new rules about whether an order could be a mixed order, like the Religious of the Sacred Heart were. Because some religious orders are apostolic, out in the world, and its members live in the world. Others are cloistered, or they're separated from the world by a metal grate. The RSCJ were a mixed order, meaning that they had some cloister, but not all cloister. Vatican II said, no, you got to pick. And so the RSCJ became apostolic, fully in the world, no more cloister. And then they decentralized the schools in this time as well, so that the superior general no longer controlled every single school in the same way. And then, the 60s created a loss of nuns. A lot of nuns who had joined not just the RSCJ, but any religious order, they decided that they wanted to live not a religious life. They wanted to explore things independently. So, combine these things, and it put the RSCJ and a lot of other religious orders into an identity crisis. So the way that we've been governing our schools, running them, the defining element of schools, the nuns themselves, we're no longer going to have these things. What are we going to do? If you look around Omaha, a lot of schools were run by religious orders, but are no longer have that distinctive feel of that religious order. For instance, Gross used to be run by the Christian Brothers, but it just feels like a standard archdiocesan school. And this is where the RSCJ really showed their brilliance. They, in the late 60s, early 70s, they saw that this was coming, this loss of nuns, and they wouldn't be able to do things the way they had been doing. But instead of just being things will turn around eventually, they're like, no, we need to figure out a new way of doing things. They figure out a way to pass the torch, pass the mission on to the laity. And I'm using that term laity. It means somebody who's not a member of a religious order or consecrated life, or isn't ordained. So I'm lay, you're lay. Literally every person in the school is a lay person, at least now. But the non-lay are the consecrated people, like the nuns or sisters or monks or brothers or priests or deacons. So the way that they figured this out was by creating the goals and criteria. So you've heard the 5 goals, you know the 5 goals already. The criteria are specific ways each goal should be achieved. And we'll be doing an activity in class talking about the criteria. So that's all you need to know about them in general, though. They are specific ways each goal should be achieved. The brilliance of the goals and criteria is that all of the network Sacred Heart schools, all the United States and Canada schools, have the 5 goals and criteria. And it gives us this unity. Even without having nuns in our school, we all have this RSCJ charism, this unique identity, this defining element. And that means that, no matter where you go, Omaha or Manhattan or Nova Scotia, if you're going to a Sacred Heart school, you're receiving that same spirit, that same spiritual identity. But at the same time, it gives us diversity. You don't need to have nuns in every school, leading every school, in order to get this defining charism. It allows non-ordained people to lead Sacred Heart schools and for us to pass on that mission even without the RSCJ present. So, here's a good moment to tell you the RSCJ motto is Cor Unum et Anima Una, in Corde Jesu, which means one heart and one soul in the heart of Jesus. One heart and one soul in the heart of Jesus. And our mission, the RSCJ mission, is to glorify the heart of Jesus. The main way that we do that, especially in Sacred Heart schools, is through education, but it's not the only way. And yeah, notice that even if we gave you just a top tier education, we wouldn't necessarily be living out the RSCJ mission. It's specifically to produce students who will glorify the heart of Jesus. And I'm going to pause there because class is about to start, and I'll pick it up on then part 2.